Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, they've been labeled as a far-right Jewish hate group.
They take on this kind of militant legacy in, defending what they see as anti-Semitism.
Betar also claims they're providing the names of university students protesting for Palestine to the U.S. government. So who are they, and what are they doing? I'm Natasha del Toro, and this is The Take.
This is not a matter of simply violating university rules. This is a movement, an anti-war movement. We have sparked similar Gaza solidarity encampments across the nation and even across the globe.
Mahmoud Khalil is a Palestinian permanent resident of the United States. He was targeted by the Trump administration after leading protests for Palestine and negotiating on behalf of students on Columbia University's campus last spring. After being arrested in New York and transferred to a detention center in Vienna, Louisiana, the judge spoke on Friday.
Mahmoud Khalil is removable, in the opinion of the judge. He said that the letter that the Secretary of State sent to the court detailing the reasons for the removal were reasonable. The letter Secretary of State explaining the reason is reasonable. However, Khalil is open to a relief application on April the 23rd, and there was a discussion of whether he be deported to Syria or Algeria.
Mahmoud's wife, a U.S. citizen, is pregnant, and in 2 weeks, their first child is due. One of the groups claiming they gave Khalil's name to the Trump administration is Betar. Jonah Valdez has been covering the organization's most recent iterations. He's a journalist at the Intercept. I spoke to him on Friday.
I'm a reporter at the Intercept, and I cover Israel-Palestine as well as social movements around Israel and Palestine here in the U.S. as it relates to foreign policy and things happening domestically.
So, Jonah, let's start with what this group is claiming. They're saying that before his arrest, they submitted Mahmoud Khalil's name to the Trump administration. And it's not just him. They say that they've sent a list of, quote, thousands of names to Trump officials with the hope that these individuals will receive similar treatment, that they're going to get arrested, detained, and ultimately deported. This isn't a group that we've heard that much about. Tell me about them.
Yeah, so Betar actually has a decades-long history. They started in Europe in the 1920s as sort of this, militant answer toward what at the time was a rise in anti-Semitic attacks. I think the through line up until today is what members of Betar often tweet is this hashtag Jews fight back. And, they take on this kind of militant legacy in defending what they see as anti-Semitism. Now, of course, today they found new life post October 7, with all the at this point, a global movement of student protests on campuses for Palestine against Israel's war on Gaza. They've really seized this opportunity to position themselves as really, staunch opponents of whatever sympathies one might have for Palestine or any criticism of the state of Israel at this point. They've been described, though, as a hate group, even by more, pro-Israel organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, which, of course, has its own issues. A good way to understand them is like breaking them down twofold as far as what they do online and what they do in person. And they go hand in hand, of course. Both, I think, have the intent to just agitate and kind of, escalate based on, getting reactions out of their, verbal attacks and physical confrontations at protests. They call it counter-protests. They'll show up at planned pro-Palestinian rallies across the U.S.
You are a terrorist! You are a terrorist! No, you're terrorist!
One protester, recalled to me that basically they'll target visibly Palestinian or Arab or Muslim protesters. Oftentimes, if they're wearing things like a keffiyeh, you become a target for for folks like Betar. And, they'll get in your face and, will call you things like terrorist, jihadi. And oftentimes, like, the protest itself is pretty, the tone could be pretty somber. They've been known to single out activists by name. They monitor them online and then show up at these rallies.
And now they're sending, they claim to be sending all of these names of people that they think should be deported, people who they are saying are anti-Semitic, maybe just for showing up at rallies, to the Trump administration. Do we know if what Betar is saying is actually what happened? I mean, do they have influence with the Trump administration? Are they feeding them names?
Yeah, I mean, the question of influence between Betar and the Trump administration is hazy at best at this point. I think it's still a big question in our newsroom. At the Intercept, we have filed multiple public records requests with government agencies to really figure out and establish, what is the connection? Are there emails to show that they are sending this list? But if we're going to take their word for it, Betar has claimed to have sent thousands of names, like you said. They've been, claiming this since Trump's election in November. There's been reporting that the former leader of Betar, Ross Glick, has been in touch with members of Congress, including John Fetterman out of Pennsylvania and Ted Cruz. And there was, within some of those reports, there was also seeming collaboration directly with the White House. So, all of this is still unverified. And I think that's why, we in our newsroom are careful to not overstate their influence and their connections, because, I think they want every opportunity to kind of, build an audience around what they perceive as protecting Jewish safety, which, of course, is a misnomer for attacking the Palestinian movement.
And so what you're saying is we don't really know if they're talking to one another, but the Trump administration and Betar definitely seem to be aligned in their efforts to crack down on pro-Palestine speech.
President Trump signed an executive order today that addresses anti-Semitism on college campuses. The new policy would direct the federal government to cancel student visas for what the White House calls Hamas sympathizers.
I want to dive into the history just in one moment, but before we even get to that, just understanding, getting my head around who this group is. In a post that I saw on social media, Betar responded to a list of names of those killed in Gaza by Israel. And it included a list of, hundreds of Palestinian babies who had been killed. And in the post, they say, not enough. We demand blood in Gaza. I mean, this is talking about babies who have been killed. And they're saying not enough. They later deleted that post, but, this is just to say how extreme this group is. I know that you've been following them on social media, too. So maybe, Jonah, tell me, what has your experience been with this group? Like, how did you even come across them?
My experience with Betar started in my coverage of those two executive orders. And really, I just wanted to wrap my head around, what were the implications for activists, for people who are on the streets, putting their identities, their faces out there in the name of Palestinian liberation, and some of whom are here on visas and are risking a lot. This risk existed for them even before groups like Betar sprang up. I wanted to understand the implications of this order that is now targeting them. Throughout my reporting, something that just kept coming up online and, other activists and legal experts I was talking to was mention of this group, Betar. And I, do a quick search and I find out they have this deportation list, but at the time, there was just not a lot of coverage about them. There was only 2 public names attached to them, and it still kind of is that way, very shadowy, which is Ross Glick, a New York entrepreneur, and Ron Tarosian, a public relations CEO, a fairly successful one, but is known to be pretty bullish in his tactics.
Yeah, I was going to just say it's interesting when you look on their website, it says they're a proud Zionist organization, but then you don't actually see many names on there. So you don't really know who is in the group.
Yeah, I think that's the irony, is a lot of their reason for showing up at these protests is to, kind of quote unquote out these protesters and identify them and send their names to the Trump administration. And yet they won't identify themselves. But when I started to take them a little bit more seriously was on the day that Trump signed this executive order to combat anti-Semitism. They, of course, a group like Betar, they, of course, celebrate it online, and immediately they start targeting this vigil, which is for, Hind Rajab, who I'm sure your listeners know was a 5-year-old Palestinian girl who was killed by the Israeli military alongside her family. Some 300 bullets were fired from a tank into her car, killing her, and she's become a symbol for, the pro-Palestine movement. So there's this vigil, and it's the 1-year death anniversary for her. They have, candles and flowers and photos of Hind, and this is something that Betar wants to disrupt. And what happens is they show up and they start screaming.
Show us your faces so we can get you deported.
We work with ICE.
We're with ICE.
We work with ICE.
We work with ICE.
ICE. ICE. ICE.
ICE, which is a reference to the Immigration Customs Enforcement. And, we're going to deport you.
It seems like they were very emboldened then by the Trump executive order.
Right, almost in lockstep. And I think once I saw that met out on the streets, it's like, okay, I should start taking them more seriously.
More on Betar after the break. So, Jonah, you come across this group, you start reporting on them, and then you end up interacting with them. You reach out, for your story. And what happened then? Tell me about your interaction with the people from Betar.
Yeah, so just like any source in a story, when I write about you, I will reach out for comment to make sure that I give you a fair chance to respond to some of the allegations against you. In this case, I reach out on X, formerly Twitter, and shoot them a DM with all my questions about, their nonprofit status, when they receive that, some of their tactics, what their aims are and goals are. And instead of response to my questions, or instead of like a no comment, which they have every right to do, they kind of go after me in a way that I'm not used to from sources. And they ask whether I'm an American citizen. They ask if I've ever left the United States. And, they're asking what my thoughts are on Israel's occupation of the West Bank. And, of course, they use the term Judea-Samaria. I'm a little bit taken aback by, are you an American citizen question? And I don't know, as a child of immigrants from the Philippines who's very proud of my heritage, I didn't want to be, I guess, put in that position of fear either. So I was, went ahead and said I am an American citizen, but I'm also, child of immigrants who come from the Philippines. And like, so what kind of thing, and I try not to personalize it. And I say okay, if no one can answer my questions, direct me to someone who can. And they stop engaging. I stop engaging. But they go after me on Twitter and they start tweeting about my account. And they're calling me, a jihadi reporter who hates Jews.
But, everything that you're describing to me, you were doing your duty as a journalist, asking them, for right of reply. You want to confirm, the information that you have, verify the information. And what you're describing, their response, is incredibly intimidating. Did you feel threatened?
I did. And, immediately my colleagues and I who are being targeted on social media, we get our legal counsel involved, we get our cybersecurity expert involved, and we have these, frank conversations of how much presence online do you have? Are your family members, where are their addresses online? You can't be too careful.
Right. Yeah. No, you definitely cannot be too careful. Al Jazeera reached out to them, and this is what they said, quote, "Those who come to the United States on visas or as naturalized citizens don't have the right to come participate in Hamas events or support, quote, terrorist organizations." They also claim that their mainstream Zionist group, they say that they represent the majority of the Zionist and the Israeli public. One thing that's interesting, they do actually have a link, a history with the Israeli party in power now.
Mm-hmm.
What do we know about that?
Yeah, so again, they were founded in the 1920s by a pre-Israeli state Jewish writer named Zev Jabotinsky. He's a very prominent pre-Israeli state Zionist who was really one of the early proponents of both starting an Israeli state, but also using, armed means to do so. And, there's still a lot of historical debate about, the exact contours of what he was asking for, but he would eventually, evolve into what we today would call ideas of ethnic cleansing and, forcibly removing Arabs from Palestine. And, they have, a lot of what they claim is they have direct connections with, prominent members of the Likud party, including Benjamin Netanyahu's father, who was a longtime secretary and writer with Zev Jabotinsky. And, they say that these figures within the Likud party were Betar members themselves as youth. And it's no surprise there's a lot of alignment with the Likud party and their very, far-right ideology, which is not interested in any sort of two-state solution or any sort of, self-determination for Palestinians. It's really interested in the erasure, the removal, ethnic cleansing, and genocide of Palestinians. So, I think they go kind of hand in hand with, what they're cheering on from here in the US and sort of what's playing out in Israeli politics in Israel-Palestine.
Wow. And to know that Benjamin Netanyahu's father was a long-term chief of staff of the founder of this group, Zev Jabotinsky. I mean, this is a group who is claiming to fight against anti-Semitism. I mean, the Trump administration has been aligned with their cause to silence pro-Palestine voices, claiming that they're anti-Semites or terrorism, in this effort to combat anti-Semitism. But at the same time, they are being aggressive themselves. Are there any repercussions for members of their group?
There hasn't been. And I think that's the challenging part is, there's not a lot of recourse for this. I'm not aware of any police reports filed. I'm hearing murmurings of possible litigation against some of their members, lawsuits, filed against them for claims of harassment. I think what activists and even reporters are doing at this point is trying to, understand Betar a little bit more and kind of expose what connections do exist. You mentioned that they're on the far end of the spectrum when it comes to, the pro-Israel group. I think it's still important to see them as sort of a product of, a type of thinking within some of these pro-Israeli groups that say any opposition to Israel is anti-Semitism.
It's this conflating of critiquing Israeli government's actions, critiquing the war on Gaza with anti-Semitism or, again, with terrorism. Not long ago, I actually remember a time when there were alt-right groups marching in Charlottesville who were very supportive of Donald Trump, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." So there's been some shift. And obviously, we do not condone anti-Semitism. But what's happening here is that they are linking protests against a war, a genocide against Palestinian people, a critique against Israeli government with anti-Semitism, which is that seems to be the new form of McCarthyism here. So I would say it's pretty easy to get cynical in this conversation. But Jonah, is this really a situation that with whoever is aligned with Trump has the power over free speech right now in the United States? I mean, is anyone working to stop this?
Yeah, I think the biggest opposition to these attacks right now exists in the courts, like in cases like Mahmoud, and be the loudest opposition to this idea that the Trump administration can really target anyone for, what they're saying in their schools. I think a lot of protesters are staying home, and this is a measure they're taking to protect their own safety. One of the individuals on Betar's list is award-winning Palestinian poet Musab Abu Toha, and he is very active in posting against genocide in Gaza. He just canceled his tour to present his poetry and speak out of fear for his own safety, fear for his family's safety. He didn't want to travel. He is afraid of picking up his kids from school. But some protesters are continuing to show up, and they're continuing to, further their cause and, be as loud as possible about it. And that's their response to this climate of fear that, you won't intimidate us to the point where we'll stop our movement. And yeah, a lot of admiration for their bravery in this moment, but also understandably the fear that a lot of people are hiding from.
And that's the take. We know that there is a whirlwind of news washing over the globe right now. So thanks for stopping by to take a closer look beyond the headlines. And while you're here, take a minute to let us know about the other news on your mind. What stories are affecting your life and your world? We'd love to get into those too. So drop a line here because we read all the comments and we look forward to hearing from you. We'll be back tomorrow.